if you have seen over the past year or so, I mean, it's of course been a year of turmoil, if in discussions of, race or riots, or whether they were, these of this past week or those of last year, whatever, if you have any sort of inclination or see people post something along the lines of, we cannot make, I'm not going to make any sort of statement here on anything that has happened. What we just need is more revival, or something like that. That the solution to the unrest in our country is revival. What I want to suggest to you is that is coming from a place of Christian perfectionism. And by the way, not to cast too many aspersions on, kind of other Christian traditions. So I say this without malice, but just as a, to kind of place it for you in terms of thinking. The idea of perfectionism comes largely from kind of Pentecostal Christian traditions. And, non-denominational traditions kind of can feed into that in some ways. And also to a certain extent in Catholicism. The idea that I can kind of get to a place where my sin is so minimal that I don't really have to deal with it on a daily or even, kind of minute by minute basis. That's kind of, this is where this generates in many ways from. But if you've seen anybody kind of suggest, okay, the problem here is not, a race problem, it's just a sin problem, and what we need is more people to come to Jesus. I want to suggest to you, you probably see, now that I'm pointing this out, that's rooted not in identifying sin in my own heart and then repenting for it. That's rooted in Christian perfectionism. The idea that as long as I just become a Christian, that everything else will be okay. So, for instance, if you've ever said or heard somebody say, we don't have a race problem in the country, we have a sin problem. Well, that's those are clearly not mutually exclusive. You can have a race problem and a sin problem, and those two things be deeply, deeply connected. And it's almost like saying, we don't have a murder itself is not a problem, it's sin. Well, murder is a sin. There's problem, and those are not kind of mutually exclusive things. And so the idea to say all we need is revival, as if to say once people are Christians, now all of our other problems will go away, is to kind of subvert and fail to identify what are the specific sins that are going on that need to be addressed. And that's kind of Christian perfectionism. All right, that's one example. Let me give you another one that I think in many ways is probably much more prevalent. And I want to offer this one to you as, things that I have thought about because it has been very deeply kind of personal. This is in many ways, if you know me well, you will know that this is something that I personally struggle with. And I want to suggest that the place on a daily basis where most of us encounter our tacit Christian perfectionism is our quickness to be toward defensiveness when we are confronted about anything. If you find yourself in any way with your emotions or your mind or anything like that being defensive when someone challenges you in any way, then I want to suggest to you that is a root problem that is identified with Christian perfectionism. And the reason is this. Because if somebody, challenges you on anything, and this is, of course, not just kind of racial issues. If somebody challenges you on anything and your immediate reaction is to say, how dare you? And to kind of get in a fighting stance of some sort, then there's two things that are going on. Number one, and again, I'm talking about me. I don't want to project too much on you. You might have to apply some of this to you, but this is all me. Then what that means is, number one, I am not leading. Like if you encounter me on a normal day, usually if you challenge me, I'm going to say, that's not true. I didn't do X. And that's me not leading with the idea of saying, my sin is so wrapped up in my entire being that, of course, I'm sinful. And let's try to untangle where it is. But even more so, it's also me saying, or especially on issues of race and such in America, saying the way that I think must be right. And therefore, you must be wrong. And now let's kind of get into an argumentative stance. And I want to suggest to you that the confession comes in, as does Scripture, the Scriptures that we just read. The confession is essentially a commentary on some of these Scriptures. The confession comes in and says, you cannot trust the way that you think. You cannot trust basically anything that you do, that it is free from sin. And therefore, Christianity is so, in our country, it's so different than the way that we think of ourselves when it comes into, kind of in our context in the world. Christianity looks at you and me and says, it's not that you are innocent until proven guilty. It's not even that you are guilty until you're proven innocent. You're just guilty. That's just all it is. I mean, it's hard. This is why it's hard for us to deal with. But the confession is very clear, and Scripture is very clear. Your sin is literally everywhere. Literally everywhere. It is in the way that you think. It is in the things that you do. It is in the way that you process things. It is in your relationships. It is in your emotions. And when we get defensive about something, then it betrays the idea that I think that, and particularly if I justify it because I'm a Christian, therefore I must be right about something, instead of leading with saying, I must be wrong, and so if you present something to me, you're probably right. Let's investigate that a little bit more.